Hi, we're Nia and Mary-Anne from Seren Health Coaching. We are metabolic health coaches who are passionate about good metabolic health for everyone. We also love to chat about all things health and to share as much information as we can with people who want to make changes to their lifestyle but aren't quite sure where to start. We're going to release a new episode every Friday where we talk about a different aspect of health. So do subscribe and let us know what you think. We'd also love to know what you're interested in too. So if there's something that you'd like us to have a chat about, do send us a message and we'll do our best to cover it soon.
Good
Okay.
morning, Nia. How are
Good morning,
you?
good morning. I'm good. How are you?
I'm all right. And today it's all about posing an important, complicated, even somewhat uncomfortable question that
Good.
we can't really answer. But
Excellent.
yeah, but I'm really interested to know, particularly with your pharmaceutical background,
Mm.
what you think about this, because I think we sort of have agreed in the past that we really want to help people to change behavior in terms of lifestyle
Mm-hmm.
and health. And that's our job in a way.
Mm-hmm.
But there was something happened that made me think about this really carefully. So it all started when I heard a fascinating conversation in passing on the radio, like you did
Mm-hmm.
recently. And the question was posed to various experts about whether widespread use of GLP-1 weight loss drugs was a feasible idea, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
my reaction was, "Oh, this is so preposterous.
Yeah.
What? You're gonna put it in the water?" So the interviewer
Mm.
had 2 experts on the program as part of that discussion. One was a statistician, the other was a medical epidemiologist. So interesting
Okay.
people, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And although the statistician was maybe slightly less keen on population-wide use of
Mm.
GLP-1s, they were both, in theory, very enthusiastic that these drugs could treat not only obesity, but everything that comes with it. And
Okay.
that in theory, this might actually have legs. So I became more interested in, I thought these are eminent expert brains
Mm.
and they think this is something feasible.
Doable. Mm.
Okay, so obesity is, of course, only one, and we know that, aspects and
Mm.
applications for this drug. There are loads of different uses now, and it's all coming sort of popping out the woodwork. There's
Mm.
cardiologists using it post heart attacks. There's even talk about primary prevention in cardiology.
Mm.
And of course, there's a whole load of remission from chronic diseases and also things like addictions. So there's
Yeah.
lots of possible applications for this
Mm-hmm.
drug. This is a huge, I think, change in sort of attitude to medication and obesity. And maybe the first time we've had a class of drugs that really does have some long term applications, right? So you'd agree with that?
Okay. Yeah, no, absolutely. I'd agree with that. I think
Right.
there's a huge amount of applications for it. In a way, if you just view it as the solution, as the magic bullet,
Yeah.
then yes, you can see that there's a massive impact, and that if we were all medicated with it, there
Yeah.
could be some serious benefits, particularly on
Yeah.
our health service and
From a
demands. And
So
yeah,
if you look
okay.
down at the population that way, and I suppose that's a sort of different way of looking at it. If you were just an academic and you're
Yeah,
looking
it's quite
down, you're
a
thinking, let's just put this in the water,
yeah, so
right?
it's in kind of a way they're taking a step back from all of the issues that we
Yes.
we see on the ground. They're
Yes.
taking a bird's eye view, and they're saying,
Yeah.
look, this is the problem. Everybody gets this, and
Yeah.
these are the widespread effects.
Yeah.
I can
So
see I
okay,
can see why they've got there. Yeah.
so if you have some negative fallouts, that might be worth it. It's all about herd sort of doing
Herd
good and all that.
immunity, isn't it? Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
yeah, sort of that. What's it
Interesting.
called? Whatever it's called. I can't remember the ethical term for it. But basically, you do it for the good of others. So you might find the drug doesn't do you any good, but it actually does another 9 people out of 10 good. So
Yeah.
it's that sort of thought. Okay,
Mm,
so I
okay.
was mind blown at first, and honestly, I thought this ridiculous idea. But
Mm.
then I began to imagine a world where people all slim down, really active, more productive. I didn't really think about productive, but that's
Oh, well,
another
that's
thing
why
they
the
quote. Um,
unemployment. Yes,
and
let's get
less, yeah,
everybody.
employment, less sick. And I started to get quite taken by this idea and found
Mm.
myself thinking, Wonder what Nia thinks. And also, we'll have done ourselves out of a job if we think that this is the answer. Is it?
Yeah. I don't so it's really interesting, isn't it? Because from a bird's eye perspective, when
Yeah.
you say it like that,
Yeah.
if everybody was metabolically healthier, more active, more productive, less sick, that's amazing. And that's
Yeah.
basically what we
Why?
want,
What
isn't
are we
it?
waiting for?
Yeah. So, but there's a reason that these people are in the jobs that they're in, and they don't see people on the front line, and they don't
Yeah.
see their
But
individual
they're not
problems.
stupid,
No, they're
and they
not.
understand the complication rates and all of that, but they're
No.
still saying, but overall, the
They think
benefits
it's a benefit.
outweigh
So
the risks.
I can
Yeah.
see that from a
Okay.
bird's eye view. I can totally understand how they've got to that because it's a really great drug. Okay, we can't argue with the fact that
No. We don't
we've
like the fact, do we? We don't almost like to say it's a great drug, you
no,
and
but it
I.
is. I think we did say this before actually in our previous podcast on
Yeah.
GLP-1s. It is a fantastic drug.
Okay.
There has been a lot
But
of
there's a bit
research
of us
into
that
it.
doesn't want it to
Of
be the
course, of course.
forerunner, does it? Do
No.
we?
Well,
Yeah.
because there's I think maybe with the benefit of hindsight, and we've been around for many, many of a quick fix weight loss drug
Yes.
that have had some
Yeah.
serious implications. So it's hard to be 100% enthusiastic about something that we don't
Okay.
know if it's got serious complications. But
Okay.
the other thing is, and to say, nothing we've ever done to date has ever had
Yes, that's what
this
struck me.
effect. So
I
it's
thought this is
great.
all very well talking about, behavior change, but we've been talking about this for a very long time.
Mm.
And don't many
But
people say to you, but people don't do it.
of course, and that's true. And then there's obviously the financial burden of obesity, which I think
Huge.
is something like £19 billion or something
I know. I
ridiculous on
looked
the
at the
NHS.
figures. I'll give you the figures, but it's not to be debated that it's
No,
costing us our
a
health service.
fortune. It is. And so I get it, but I'm still skeptical
Okay.
because I am very aware that drugs are not the answer to all the problems. It's not a magic wand. Nothing is. And I think from experience and from seeing all the other drugs on the market and from just seeing patients on a day-to-day basis,
Okay.
you just don't know what's going on in people's
Yeah.
lives. You
So
just
you're
don't
at
know.
the coal face in a way, aren't you? Less more so than I am, but I'm sort of seeing this in a slightly rosier light since I looked at
Y
the data.
Yeah, but then it's
Um,
about root causes as well, you know?
yes.
Ultimately, if we don't get rid of the root cause, why are we doing this?
Okay, so there we go. So we talk about root causes, but in the meantime, we're going to drown while
Mm,
we
mm.
while we consider this. So does it mean if GLP-1s were the answer to our prayers in terms of saving our health service? I can imagine the health service without obesity. Can you?
Well, it would
I
be
can't
amazing.
imagine you get an appointment tomorrow with
Well, yeah.
any of your consultants.
Imagine if you had a musculoskeletal problem, you'd have it,
Yes.
you'd be
I
in
mean,
super quick.
it's in every sphere of Western medicine.
It
And
is.
that's the problem. People don't often know that. But I mean, eyes, dermatology, there's huge, you know,
There are
MSK, all the orthopedics,
endocrinology,
all enormous.
pregnancy,
Yes,
fertility.
yes,
Obviously,
complications of pregnancy. Okay,
obviously,
so
obviously, obviously, there are huge benefits to
right,
reducing
so
the risk of obesity.
if you use GLP-1s in a really widespread way, so we're talking about 60% of the population, that's what they were talking about
Oh,
in
wow. Yeah.
in
Okay.
academic terms. Okay, that's not really going to happen. But does this mean we could then continue to live stress sedentary lives on cheap ultra processed foods and not worry too much about the effects of our
Well, when you
environment?
say it like that, no, because what's the point in continuing to live awfully, having a miserable life, but just
Well,
jabbing yourself? Honestly.
okay. But if you're looking at it from outside, so you're showing a Martian round, right? And
Okay.
you're trying to argue the point. I mean, the Martian would say, look, sounds like a plan. Because you say nothing has worked very well before. We haven't even made a dent in this with anything
Mm.
we've ever used before, whether it's behavior change, lifestyle change, exercise, whatever all the drugs which were generally not that effective and very short-lived. So,
But isn't it interesting, though, that you can say that, but then let's compare it to something like smoking, right?
yeah,
Tobacco companies had a massive share of the market. They
they
had the
did.
ear of the politicians. They
Yep.
and
Yep.
then there was a sea change and they lost money. And people said smoking's bad for your health, it's giving us
And
cancer,
why
it's
was
giving
the
us heart
sea
disease.
change? What caused the sea change? Was
Well,
it
that's
because the data didn't add up in the end and the cost to the
overwhelmed the
country was more than
I think it just
the
takes
tax
one brave
benefit,
person to stand up and say, no, this is not good for
or
us,
not ethically
or
right?
not ethically. It took us a long time to get there.
I don't
Doctors
know.
were
It's
advertising tobacco for goodness sake. But
yeah, I remember it
the
well.
the impact of these people on the people that make decisions for our health is huge. And it's the same with the food industry. They've
Yes.
developed a model in which we must rely. And it's not the only way of eating, it's not the only way of making money either, but it's a very unethical.
But how do you get the I mean, smoking was small fry compared to eating because
Course.
there was I mean, actually, I mean, smoking wasn't that small. There was a fair amount of the population, but I suspect it was never more than, I don't know, 20% or something. I'm only guessing. We're
I don't
talking
know,
about
actually.
food
Yeah.
of 100% of the
Yeah, yeah,
population.
yeah.
So this is a much bigger ship to turn.
Well, it was interesting the other day that I was reading, we were, the fat tax and the sugar tax, and there
Yeah.
was, the government in the UK were trying to
Yes.
increase the cost of these things so that
Yeah.
people improve their health, but they exposed the vast amount of lobbying on behalf of the
Yes.
food
Of
manufacturers.
course.
And that's where the true power lies. And I think it's really important to this conversation to say that actually you can say, let's just give everybody a drug, but the power is from these people who have all the money, make the food, have their agenda, and the ability to push it far greater than you and I will ever have the
So
ability to push a health
would they
agenda.
have research scientists working on how to get around GLP?
Of course, because if you think about it, the tobacco companies, did you know that tobacco companies, this is very off topic, but I'm just
Yeah.
going to bear with
Yeah,
me,
yeah.
their biggest department was
Yes.
in research. They employed scientists to prove that smoking was good for you. They had an incredibly propaganda, if you
Yeah.
think about it, really,
Yeah, yeah,
a
yeah.
department that should bounce back against all the evidence that we
So
have
the
that we
food
know smoking is
industry
bad.
will be doing the same.
They will be doing the same because
Yeah.
ultimately all that
We
matters is
know
their
that.
bottom line and their shareholders,
And that's how the Western world works. I mean,
which
that's
is
how the world
awful.
works,
I've
really.
got to, and I have no shame in saying that. I don't care who takes
Yeah,
umbrage
yeah,
with me,
yeah, yeah.
but that is awful because
Okay.
actually you are killing people.
I looked at what I got very interested in the argument, but I looked at what it'll cost us if we do nothing. So if we
Oh my
keep
word.
going
Yeah, like this.
as we are, and I mean they bandy the figures about it's very hard to even make them, a bit like smoking. It was very hard to quantify exactly what you're talking
Yeah,
about. But they bandy, 6.5 billion annually, and
yeah.
that's set to rise to 9.7 billion by 2050, and that it takes into account obesity and treating diabetes, heart disease, and some
Hmm,
cancers.
hmm.
So we're talking like a lot of money. Apparently, that's a lot of money. It sort of doesn't mean a lot to me, but that
Because
could be
I think
used in many other ways. Yeah.
once you get to the billions, it doesn't really matter
It's
how
sort of
many billion.
meaningless. Yeah. And there was a report from the Tony Blair Institute. Thought that was fun.
Oh,
And it found
didn't even
that
know you had one.
morbidly obese patients cost the NHS twice as much as those within healthy weight range, which is
Of
not a
course.
surprise.
Yeah, yeah.
But it slowly decreases as that BMI drops into that normal range. So it's costly whether if you're overweight at all, it's going to cost
Yes, but
more,
then
right?
proportionally
Okay.
it's less.
Yeah.
Yes, which is in line with
Yeah,
the fact that we
what you'd
know that
understand.
even
Yeah.
5% weight loss from wherever you start has a massive
Okay.
impact on your
Yeah.
health. Yeah.
Okay. Which
So
is
that's
what
fair enough.
we know. Okay, but even more worrying is the wider societal costs, including loss of productivity, which I didn't really understand at first, but if you think about it, it's there, and also
Mm,
just quality of life to individuals, and of course health spans, which is incredibly important for us
yeah.
because
And
seeing people out who spend the last decade of their life immobile and ill or
yeah,
frail is very costly for our
of
society,
course. Now,
basically.
I would argue that quality of life is far more important than productivity, but
Okay,
that's
well,
because I'm not business
you
minded.
would, and that's where you come in. But I also think if we think about it in a wider sense of our world, the
Yeah,
productivity. And that's, of course, where this awful idea came from, which we thought was really awful, of offering overweight people who are unemployed GLP-1s.
yeah.
And this
But
was,
then
we thought this was a really terrible indictment
it is.
of our society. But when
I
you think
have
about it, it has roots in the data.
Yeah, I mean, I do understand that in order to be a country that gives people a better quality of life, there has to be a certain economic standard that has to be met. We have to
Yeah,
go out to
we
work, blah, blah.
need money.
We
Yeah,
do need money. I
we're
do understand
bankrupt.
that. However, I think that the more important thing is to think about people as people and
Yes, but
about their worth.
epidemiologists are not doing that, are they? I
I
mean,
know,
that's not their job.
I know, but I'm just putting it out there because I feel it's
Yeah, I
important not
know.
to be lost in
I
the
get that, and it is to us incredibly important. But I think if you're explaining it to the Martian,
yeah.
he would say or she would say,
Who knows what
"Well,
gender the Martian is?
that's a minor detail."
Well, of course. And this is the thing is if you take that view, which these guys that you were talking about
Yeah.
were taking, it's a very academic, very
Yes,
black and white view.
it's quite simple.
Mm. And of course,
Exactly.
it makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, it was really interesting to look at the figures, and if you think about it, 1948, when Nye Bevan, thought up the NHS, what a wonderful idea. There was 10% of people were overweight in this
Yeah.
country. By
Yeah.
1970, it was starting to, and we
To
know
go.
about the steep curve upwards, and we haven't, by the way, really any dent in that curve.
No,
That's the
we
worry.
haven't. And
Okay.
that is the worry. But I have to say that although I completely understand where these people are coming from and I can definitely understand why they think it's a good idea, it just doesn't
Doesn't
it
feel
doesn't
right.
feel right. And the
Okay.
other thing is that, I get that we haven't made a dent in this, but let's think about, people like you and me, and there are many, many people
Yeah.
like us, and there are
Yeah.
functional medicine people, there are
Yeah.
low carb,
Yeah.
there's a
Is that
huge
big enough? Is that momentum
yeah, but we're
big
not
enough?
big enough. That's the thing. It's a
Mm.
very much like a David and Goliath kind of thing.
Yeah, it
And
feels
Goliath
like
is the
that,
food
doesn't it?
manufacturer. Yeah.
Yeah, it feels like we just can't turn this
A
enormous
ship.
ship. That's what it feels like to
But
me.
I don't think that means that we should therefore
Believe in the other way, the
Yeah,
simple
I
way.
don't think it means that we should just
Mm.
go for a magic bullet because there are harms to that and there are unintended consequences and these are people at the end of the day. If it was that
Yeah.
nobody would get hurt, fine, but there is the
Yeah.
potential rather for this
Yeah.
to actually hurt people and
Okay, so that's why I wanted to ask you, because I think you are a medicine person
mm,
in the sense that you were a medicine scientist and
yeah,
you will have really studied the benefits of medicines historically.
of course, and
And
there are
so
some
your view
amazing
is
benefits.
very much more balanced, maybe, than someone like me who found out sort of by mistake that maybe medicine wasn't the only answer.
Mm.
Um, so, I sort of feel like you really have a good view.
So I think the other thing to say is that there are some people for whom these medications will save their lives and that is
Yeah,
undoubtedly true.
yeah, and we know that because
So I'm
we
not
started
against
right
them.
at the beginning.
Yeah, I'm really not against them for those people who really need them.
Absolutely. I mean, why would you be?
Exactly. So it has to be done on a case by case basis. It has to be done taking into account the whole host of things that some people deal with that we just don't have any idea of.
So when you deal with clients on a daily basis, I suppose what you get is a much more balanced view, because the people who are coming to you, they didn't not want to improve their
Of
health.
course they
I mean, they
didn't.
didn't want to get in this mess. So
Of
there's a lot
course.
of factors that have got them
Led to
where they
them.
are.
Of course. And so this is the problem. We can't just take people as a
We haven't got a
cohort.
magic wand.
No.
No.
So I think I'm not against them. I'm against their blanket use without consideration for what they possibly could
And I
do.
suppose I would have thought I would be too, but there is a bit of me that thinks, well, is this a bit like, I don't know, is this a bit like immunizing everybody with the intent of benefit for the most and ignoring the cost to some
Yes, but you see, the
people?
thing is, when you immunize people against horrible diseases like diphtheria
Yes,
and
yes,
cholera,
yes,
you also improve the water supply.
yes, yes. I get
So the
that's a
root
sort of
cause was also
wider,
changed,
there's
wasn't it?
wider application. I know, but I don't know. I've sort of got it in my head that we should be careful about our cynicism over
Oh,
over
yeah,
pharmacology
pharmaceutical.
and pharmaceutical companies and the money-making antics. I mean, I know all that.
I
I
think it
know all
has to be
that.
taken as a whole, and unfortunately, I mean, this is interesting. The other day, I heard that Novo Nordisk, who
Yes.
are the
Yes, the
primary manufacturer,
leading money
yeah,
makers in terms of
they got
GLP-1s.
they got kicked out of the pharmaceutical industry's own
Oh,
regulatory
really?
board because they were felt to the other pharmaceutical, because it is all regulated by pharmaceutical companies. It's their own club.
Anyway,
They
yes.
got kicked out of their own club for being unethical.
There you go, and they've also lost a lot of money recently, so I think the CEO's in some
Oh, is
difficulty.
he?
Yes,
Interesting.
they've lost some of those market share. I mean, obviously this drug, they've waited for this drug for many, many
Of
years. I
course,
mean,
because
we've
it's
talked
going to
about
solve
this
their
drug
issues.
a very long time. And you and I were around in 2015 or whenever it was originally launched for diabetics. We in a way saw the best therapeutic use of this drug.
Yes.
There were
Yes.
people that had no hope, and it really turned people around in terms of what they could
The
do. And I always thought it enhanced their
care.
chances of behavior change and lifestyle
I
change. And
think
I
it does.
still see that. I still see that you could use this drug in very amazing, beneficial ways. But what we do know is that the blanket use of it is a different story.
And we have to remember as well that whilst it's an incredibly effective drug in type 2 diabetes, and it
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
the doses are very different.
So
Very,
there's
very
another thing that
different.
people don't necessarily take into account is the dosage. So the pharmaceuticals presumably thought this is such a good drug, we'll up the dose
Well, yes, and
to
that's the
get
thing as well. Remember
more
when
effect.
people are paying you for losing weight, you have to prove that you can do that.
Otherwise, they'll pay somebody else down the road. So
Exactly.
therefore, they started using bigger dosage.
And as you notice, as more and more drugs come out, the
Yeah.
doses get higher and higher.
See, I
And
don't notice the doses as much as you do. That's
in the research that
interesting.
I did the other day, um, I noticed that I cannot see the scientific evidence for the reasons why they chose to do that. It's not clear. There's
Okay.
no, by the way, this
Well,
is
it's
so it
clear
can only
sort of
lead.
in a
Well, the
behavioral
only,
ways. I mean, if somebody loses weight faster and
yeah,
is paying money, they'll love that, and their friends will all come. So,
exactly. So this is the financial aspect is the only reason I can pin at the moment without
okay,
doing further research onto why the drugs doses are so high.
interesting, and I don't think that's generally known, is it? The other
Well, you
thing,
wouldn't look at it, would you, unless you were boring like me?
we love a boring nerd like you. That's exactly why I love you, because you are much more detailed about these things, and which gives you, a better view, so a more balanced view rather than what I'm getting, which is more of a feely view, really. Um,
I think all of it is valid, and I think it's a conversation we have to keep revisiting, to be
yeah,
perfectly honest.
okay.
It's not the conversation's not done.
No, and it won't be done for a very long time.
No.
And I thought there's a few we can stop this conversation because we're not going to answer that sort of empirical question, which is should we use GLP-1s on 60% in 60% of the population,
Mm,
um, and almost put it in the water. I mean, what happened to fluoride? But anyway, that sort of widespread use in society to try and fix a problem without prevention. So we're trying to
it's
fix it without going to the root of the
yeah,
problem. We say live like you live because we can't change the way you live. So therefore, we'll just try and fix it at the other end. Okay, never been
yeah.
terribly successful in my view, but it's very tempting, and it's very tempting if you're looking at the money, the productivity, and all the other things.
It is.
Okay, and the sort of questions that emerged, and there are lots of them for the
Mm,
future.
yeah, yeah.
What about the cosmetic use of these drugs? So we haven't
Wow.
talked about that. So this
Well,
is not
this
for
is
the
fascinating.
overweight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is currently a question that I'm reading about a lot in lifestyle sort of supplements in the
Okay.
newspaper,
Yeah.
where people are saying, well, we were all for body positivity, but now suddenly,
Yeah. So
people
is
who
there?
are
Yeah.
overweight are not getting modeling jobs anymore like they were 5 years
So
ago.
would you be blamed then for being overweight if there's an answer? So
Well,
it's
that's an interesting thing, isn't
yeah,
it? That I
yeah,
think is
yeah,
coming
yeah.
back
Okay.
because previously, say in the 2000s when everyone was skinny and it was a double zero, do you remember that was the
Double
thing
zero.
to aim
Whatever
for, which
was
is
that? Yeah,
insane.
one leg went in that, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, if you think about that,
Yes.
and then we went to body positivity and celebrating that people can
Yes,
be
you're
all
allowed to
different
be
shapes and
healthy.
sizes.
Yeah.
And then we're now saying, well, now you've got no excuse.
Or
So
are we? We're saying that between the lines. We're sort of
we
saying,
are, though, aren't
if
we? If
you're very
people are not getting
big,
that,
then you
yeah.
should be using a medication. It's a bit like saying, if you smell of, I don't know, body odor, there's something we can give you.
The interesting thing about the smoking comparison, right, was
Yeah.
when I was growing up, the smoking ban hadn't come into force yet.
Yeah.
So, although I probably intrinsically knew that smoking wasn't a great thing, but it was
Well,
much
it
more
smelled
accepted.
terrible for a
Yeah.
start.
But now, you see people saying so and so smokes in a negative way
Yes,
because,
absolutely. It's
so I
very
think
much changed the
the perspective and the
landscape. Yes,
and I
I
think you'd
get
have the
that.
same thing now with why
Yes,
would you
so
still be obese if you
will
could
that
do
be
something
worrying?
about it?
There'd be worrying bits of that. So if you're obese, it's your fault. Now there's
Now
an
there's a
answer.
solution for you,
Okay. And what
and it's
about
only
eating disorders? So is
well,
could there be, I don't know, explosion in eating
I think
disorders?
that I think there will be, and there
Okay.
will be and if it's not a full blown eating disorder, it will be a
Hmm.
disordered eating epidemic.
Yes, rather
So
than the full blown, because obviously it's not related to only
there are
food.
many people with disordered eating who don't qualify for
Yes.
the
Yes. Well,
eating
some
disorder
people would say
label.
I have disordered eating because I like to eat healthy food. I mean, it's a very subjective idea,
Well,
isn't it?
but so there are people who struggle with that.
Yeah.
There's what about the real root causes? What about the real problems? If we're
Yeah.
not addressing those,
No. So we leave the
have we
food
got any hope?
industry, we leave the sedentary living, we leave the use of, widespread use of cars rather than walking. We leave the stress levels and we leave the sleep deprivation. So we could leave all that behind and just use this wonderful drug. Okay. So
Mm,
how is that going to work? I mean, it's very simplistic when you think about it. Okay.
okay.
A few other things that came out. So, are we talking about lifelong use of these drugs? Because that's the other thing that comes out, and a lot
And
of it,
who's
and
going to
there's some.
fund that?
It's hugely expensive at the moment, but it won't always be. It won't
No,
always
it
be.
won't always be, but there'll always be a new one. I think this is what we've learned.
Yes,
We started
it's
off with
already
just
moved on,
Yeah,
isn't
we
it?
started
So,
with just GLP-1s and now we get GIP and GLP-1 together.
okay,
There'll only be more as we go forward,
yeah,
and there'll only
because
be
more sophisticated
sophisticated things.
variations.
Yeah,
Okay,
and then will it be that, you're judged because you're not on the newest one,
okay,
or you're not getting the
like
results because
like
you're not on the
Apple
newest one?
phones, yeah, or
Yeah, it will
whatever,
become
yeah.
like the
Yeah.
iPhone.
Are you on the latest? Oh, no, that's the old hat one, the one that you get depressed on or whatever
Yeah,
it
yeah,
is.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
really interesting. Okay, so there's a little issue. Okay. What else did I think? I thought about um yeah, not addressing the problems that got us in the mess in the first place. Does this matter? What about the effects? Could the effects wear off over time of these drugs? So could they be
Mm.
less effective the longer you took them?
Well, potentially they could.
Could
Do we need
could your biology get around that a bit?
Yeah, so do we have a tolerance to them? Do
Yes,
we have
exactly. Do
to
we have a tolerance?
We don't know that
Maybe
yet.
we don't. Maybe
Maybe we
a
don't.
bit like insulin, we don't, or we do. I mean, you could argue about insulin, but in fact, you definitely do get a
Get
tolerance to
tolerance to
insulin
insulin. Yeah,
because
you
you
do.
put the dose up to get the
Yeah.
same effect. So you might be in the same boat with GLP-1s where you have to put the dose up to get the same effect. So what does that mean? The profile of side effects or long-term problematic effects will increase.
And if they've got certain side effects that we don't know about yet
Yeah,
that are changing us,
yeah.
are we aware that we're being changed?
So the eminent men in the discussion I originally, they happen to be men, listened to were talking about the fact that these drugs have been around long enough to know the long-term effects, which I thought was pretty naive actually, because I suspect that they've only been around in real clinical use for what, 10 years, 12 years?
Mm,
I didn't think that was long enough,
yeah.
but
I
maybe
mean,
you think
look,
that's long enough?
for 40, 50, 60, 70 years down the line of some of
Okay.
these drugs, we find out new
Okay. So, I
stuff.
mean, I don't think
And
anyone knew when they first added fluoride to the water that it might increase fracture levels.
Well, these kind of things, you don't know what you
No.
don't know.
Okay. Okay. So that's another interesting thought that came out of it. All of these we'll discuss in the future, not now. And what about the support required around these drugs? So if we know that if you use these drugs with good support, and there's some really good evidence for this, quite
Yeah,
recent studies, that they're much more effective.
they
So
are.
that coaching that we are very interested in, obviously, is very expensive
Yes. But
in
it's
terms of for a health service.
yeah, I mean,
Okay.
it's yeah. So interestingly, I was doing some CPD this weekend, and they were saying that some of the health coaching services that the NHS has been
Yes.
funding are no longer being
Yes, I
funded
see that.
because the NHS is spending this money on GLP-1s
There
instead.
you go. So let's not do the health coaching. And I can see that if you're a resource manager and you're not interested in either the clinical or psychological stuff about this, the benefits for a practice might be more if you dished out that same budget in GLP-1s. Very
Hmm.
interesting. What about muscle mass loss? We talked about
Oh,
that before and we'll
yeah.
talk about that again. So are we actually going to get people into a worse mess? And we have talked about that before.
And you and I both believe that is the case, but
Well, we believe that that might well be a problem because if people are not changing lifestyle behavior now,
hmm
if you add a GLP-1, they are almost less likely to change lifestyle.
hmm
So
hmm
it's all very well to say, oh, well, these drugs work fine as long as you're doing exercise or whatever. You'll protect your muscle mass. But we know that people don't do the sort of
strength
exercise they
training,
need to
yeah.
do now. So why are they going to do it when they're losing weight? It doesn't make any sense to me. Okay.
Well, it's part of the magic, isn't it? Because if you can
Part of the
lose weight
magic.
without doing anything,
Yes.
of course that's what you want.
I
But there's
mean, we're all lazy.
Of course we are.
I'm very
It's the
lazy.
human thing to take the shortcut.
Yes.
It's
The
not
only
a
reason
damning
I
indictment of anyone, it's just true.
the only reason I do exercise is I see people stuttering along with sticks and I think,
Don't
gotta
want that
do
to be
it. I've
me.
got to anyway.
Yeah. The only reason I exercise, I like the benefits.
Yes, and you're in a great place. Anyway, but you're in the minority by a huge
I'm
amount.
always in the minority, Marianne. I'm used to it. I live in
Well,
minority way.
yeah, in some very good ways, Nia, I'd have to
Mm.
say. And will people really want to do a lifelong drug? Because lots of people don't like the idea of lifelong medications, do they?
No, and this is
And this
fascinating to
is
me.
this will be a lifelong because if you take
Yeah.
people off, we absolutely know,
They
and
will
there's
put the
some
weight back
really
on.
good research now
Yeah.
about how long it takes to regain your weight.
So
And that's not because you're
fascinatingly,
greedy, by the way.
no.
That's because the noise comes back.
Comes back. So the interesting thing I find about all of this is that during my career as a pharmacist, I had thousands of conversations about people who just didn't want to take one more medication. I mean, you'd be
Yes,
surprised
I get that.
how common it is for
Yeah.
people to come to you and say, "Oh no, that's
Actually, I'm not
5.
doing another one.
Yeah, I just can't do another one." And you think, and mainly around lifestyle medications. I've never had somebody
Yes.
who's been, let's take
Yes.
epilepsy for example.
Yes.
You have to take your medication
Or
or
you
you will have a
might
fit.
yeah, no, sure, get it.
Yeah.
So we're talking about the sort of things you can't see the benefits of,
Yeah.
like
So
lowering your blood pressure or protecting your
cholesterol.
kidneys or,
Yeah.
protecting your
Gout.
heart or whatever. Yeah, so
Yeah,
I can see that. And people say, I just can't take more pills in the morning.
exactly. And this is the thing. So it's fascinating to me how obesity and but more really just weight loss
Yes,
transcends that. They are willing to
yes,
inject themselves, which is
yes,
fascinating. I mean,
weird.
I had to
Yes.
inject myself with anticoagulants after I had my
And
2
it's not
children.
fun.
I had to psych myself up every single day. And
And
my
yeah,
husband, who is a vet and injects animals for a living,
yeah,
couldn't watch me do it.
my golly, the therapist could have a right sort of go with that.
Yeah. So it's to inject yourself is
Yes.
really hard.
But didn't you find, and we both were in practice doing this, was that the patients were incredibly tolerant of the side effects when it came to
Mm,
GLP-1s? Much more
incredibly.
tolerant than any other drug I'd ever prescribed,
And if you
actually.
think about statins, right, and actual
Yes.
the evidence of people who have
Yeah.
rhabdomyolysis, which is muscle pain with
Yeah. It's
statins,
small.
is incredibly
Incredibly
small.
small.
But
Yeah.
thanks to the Daily Mail and other
Yes. A lot of
good
people get it.
reporting, people really do find they have muscle problems. But
Yes.
they don't to the extent where we would
No.
medically say it was. So more people are very anti taking a statin because they might get a muscular side effect
Yeah.
than injecting themselves with something that's going to cause extreme
Which we don't
nausea.
know the long term effects of.
Yeah.
But the short
Interesting.
term, but is this because obesity is such an emotive subject?
Maybe. I don't know, but this is why I don't think we're ever going to
Right.
have an
More
answer to
next
this
time.
question, Mary-Anne.
More next time. And all I've done is opened a can of worms, but
You have.
I
Happy
did really,
Friday.
I really enjoyed the can of worms because I think it's always a good idea to keep your mind open. We have
So we could
often
change our
voiced
minds.
the idea that we don't like widespread use of GLP-1s for various reasons, and they're all very valid. But I think we always have to keep that little bit of insight open
Oh,
about
definitely.
what are we really saying. Are we saying because we managed to keep our weight under control that everyone should be able to? Is there some degree of criticism in there? I'm sort of interested in my own prejudices, because we all
So,
have them.
yeah, and I do find you have to check my own prejudice
Of course,
quite
we all
regularly.
do, don't
But
we?
then I have seen people who have success with
Yeah,
and without. And I can't
I
tell
get
you
it.
why
But
that is.
but where's the data, Nia? Is the data better
Well, we don't have any
than
data for
using
behavioural change
GLP-1s?
because I think people is too hard to quantify.
It is, but it's also quite small, I fear. And
Yeah.
also the support is very expensive. So this is a cheaper way of answering the same problem.
Question. Oh my
Okay,
goodness,
more in the
Mary-Anne.
future. I think there's a lot of questions we could discuss, and these will slowly, I think, become more interesting
Yeah.
as we know more and as governments use GLP-1s, because you can see how this affects. It's not just about people's health. This
No.
is this is part of a political discussion
Discussion too. Yeah.
about the country and how we fund people in longevity. There's so much in here.
And about
Okay.
what value we put on people's lives ultimately.
Exactly, and a quality of life and caring of the elderly, and also the changing demography. It's all in there, isn't it?
Oh
We've
my
got
word.
your children are going to have to hold up a very different pyramid to the one we held
Mm.
up
Mm.
in terms of care of our
In terms of
elderly.
care. Yeah.
I mean,
Which is
basically, they
even
won't be
more
able to
reasons to
stop
do your
work
strength
forever.
training. Yeah. Still do your strength training because you don't want your children to have to pick up your care bill.
I'm absolutely desperate to. Yeah, and that really is what drives me.
Yeah.
And I
Okay.
know that I can do more because there are people running veteran races that I'm not running. There's always more to do.
Yes.
But the fitter you are, I saw something lovely. I saw an 85-year-old couple on Instagram, where you see all of life starting shuffling about and then starting weight training. And 6 months later, they walk differently.
Yeah.
I mean,
See, it's a
it's
a
very
lifelong
inspiring.
thing. Yeah.
Oh, it's so
Lifelong.
inspiring. You think, can we get everybody weight training? Could we?
Oh, I would love that. I'd love that.
Golly. And wouldn't that be a better way of. Anyway, let's.
I also think that everyone should do Pilates.
Yeah, absolutely. How can we make this, I don't know, in a capsule form? Well, nice to talk to you as ever. You might have to
And
shorten
you.
that quite a lot.
All right, then. I shall see you next time.
See you next time. Bye for now.
Bye.